_001, the woman in the corner discovery of the hard drive. The hard drive was found by accident. A group of urban explorers had broken into the abandoned Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital, a place that had been shut down in 1997 under mysterious circumstances. Stories of doctors disappearing, patients vanishing into thin air, and shadows moving in the halls had plagued the hospital long after its closure. Some believed the place was cursed. Others thought it was simply the product of old, urban legends. They weren't supposed to be there, but curiosity got the better of them. They had heard the rumors, whispers of unexplainable occurrences, sudden closures, and the hospital's eerie past. Some believed it was haunted. Others thought it held secrets that were meant to be forgotten. Either way, they couldn't resist the urge to see for themselves. Deep in the hospital's basement, behind rusted filing cabinets and decayed medical equipment, they found it. A dusty, unlabeled hard drive, still connected to an old workstation. Something about it felt wrong. The computer was long dead, but the hard drive remained intact. Thinking they had stumbled upon old hospital records or perhaps something valuable, they took it with them. That night, they plugged it into their laptop, unaware they had just unearthed something that should have stayed buried. File _001. The woman in the corner. The first file was a video log labeled file _001.wmv. The footage was grainy, black and white security camera footage with a timestamp reading March 2nd, 1994, 3:25 a.m. The camera captured a patient's room dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. The walls were bare, with an old hospital bed and a wooden chair. In the chair sat a woman in a hospital gown. Her long black hair was tangled, her hands resting unnaturally stiff on her lap. Her face was expressionless, her wide eyes staring straight ahead. For nearly 5 minutes, she didn't move. Then, at 3:30 a.m., the first strange thing happened. She turned her head, not slowly, but suddenly, like a glitch in the footage. Her neck snapped to the left at an unnatural angle. Her eyes remained wide, but her mouth slowly stretched into a faint, unnatural smile. Then, she whispered something. The microphone was faint, filled with static, but the words were just barely audible. "He is here." There was no one else in the room. Things start to get stranger at 3:32 a.m. The woman did something impossible. The footage glitched violently, the screen distorting for a brief moment. When it cleared, she was no longer in the chair. She was now standing in the corner of the room, but her eyes were still visible on the chair. The video froze for a second, then played normally again. The woman, now in the corner, slowly lifted her hand and pointed at the camera. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then suddenly the door to the room swung open on its own. The camera shook. The footage glitched again. When it resumed, the woman was gone. The chair was empty. The door was wide open. And then, just before the footage cut to black, there was a final frame. For 1 second, the screen showed an image of a face, distorted, stretched, its mouth wide open in a silent scream. The eyes were completely black. Then the file ended. The chilling realization: the urban explorers tried to research the woman in the footage. According to old hospital records, there was no patient admitted to Blackwood Psychiatric on March 2nd, 1994. No one matched her description. The room no longer existed. But the most disturbing part? The explorer hesitated before clicking pause, a cold sweat forming on the back of their neck. Their hands trembled, and a deep sense of unease settled in their chest, as if something was watching them even now. One of the explorers decided to pause the video on the exact moment the woman pointed at the camera. In the reflection of her wide, staring eyes, there was something else in the room with her. Something tall, thin, and watching. They didn't watch the second file, because that night, one of them woke up to the sound of a chair creaking in the corner of their bedroom. And when they turned on the light, the bulb flickered for a moment, casting long, shifting shadows along the walls. A chill ran down their spine as the silence of the room pressed in around them. They swallowed hard, scanning the space with wide eyes, barely breathing. The chair was empty. The chair was empty, but there were wet footprints leading away from it. Episode 2. File _002. The whispering voice. The second file. The explorers didn't want to continue. The first video had been unsettling enough. Impossible things caught on camera. A woman who didn't exist, something lurking in the background. But fear had a way of breeding curiosity, and curiosity was a dangerous thing. They argued, fear gnawing at their resolve. The first file had been horrifying. Something they couldn't explain, something that felt like it had reached beyond the screen. Every instinct told them to stop. But fear had a way of breeding curiosity, and curiosity was a dangerous thing. After hours of debating, they decided to open the next file. File _002.wma. Unlike the first, it wasn't a video. It was an audio recording, timestamped June 17th, 1995, 2:13 a.m. They plugged in their headphones, pressed play, and listened. The session, the recording began with the sound of static, followed by the voice of a man. Calm, measured, professional. Patient interview, Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital. June 17th, 1995. Session with patient 217. Dr. Wallace speaking. A moment of silence, then a second voice. Raspy, unsteady, whispering. "He's in the walls." The explorers tensed, exchanging nervous glances. Dr. Wallace's voice returned. "Who is in the walls, patient 217? Silence. Then a sharp inhalation. "The one who watches. He's always listening." A scratching sound followed, like nails running along metal. The patient's breathing quickened. "Do you hear him now?" Dr. Wallace asked. Silence. Then a whisper. "He hears you." The explorers paused the recording. The room felt colder. Their own breaths felt too loud. One of them hesitated before hitting play again. The disturbance, the recording resumed. Dr. Wallace's tone remained clinical, though a faint nervousness crept into his voice. "Tell me about the voices, patient 217. The patient exhaled sharply. The microphone picked up the faintest sound of something shifting, something wet. "It's not voices," the patient murmured. "It's him. He's whispering through them." "And what does he say?" A moment of static. Then something else. A third voice. Not the patient. Not the doctor. Something deeper. The explorers froze. The voice was barely audible but unmistakably wrong. It was layered, fractured, crawling beneath their skin. "Why are you listening?" Then a sudden, piercing scream. The explorers ripped out their headphones. Their hearts pounded in their chests. The scream still echoed in their ears, though the recording had ended. Then they noticed something. The timestamp, 2:13 a.m. Their stomachs dropped. The numbers glowed on the screen, burning into their vision. A cruel joke, an impossible coincidence, except deep down they knew it wasn't either. The clock on their laptop screen read 2:13 a.m. A sharp knock sounded from the door. No one had entered the building. Unfinished business, shaken but determined, the explorers replayed the last few seconds. The scream ended abruptly, replaced by faint breathing. Then Dr. Wallace's voice, shaky this time. "Who is he talking to?" The patient giggled. "You know who?" Dr. Wallace hesitated. "Who is he listening to?" Another pause. Then the patient whispered something that sent ice through the explorer's veins. "You." The file ended. A moment later, their laptop shut itself off, and from the dark hallway beyond their makeshift setup, they heard it. A whisper, calling their names. To be continued. The next file was titled File_003, the security footage. It wasn't the name that sent chills down their spines, it was the date. The timestamp showed it had been recorded 3 days from now. How was that possible? The files had been untouched for years. Unless someone or something was still recording, and according to the metadata, it was recorded 3 days from now. The Forgotten Files, Episode 3, File_003, the security footage, the third file. The explorers hesitated before opening the next file. The first had been disturbing. The second had been worse. But this was something impossible. File_003.mp4. The metadata confirmed their fears. This file had been recorded 3 days from now. But the footage was already here, waiting for them. The room felt colder as they clicked play. The footage begins. At first, the screen was black. A timestamp appeared at the bottom right corner, June 20th, 2023, 2:17 a.m. Then the video flickered to life. It was security camera footage, grainy and colorless, captured from a high angle. The location was immediately recognizable. The room they were sitting in. The explorers leaned closer, their breathing shallow. The screen showed their exact setup, the same table, the same laptop, the same dimly lit hallway beyond. But there was one difference. Someone was sitting in the chair closest to the camera, a person with their back to the screen. The unseen intruder. The explorers counted their group. 3 people, no one else. At first, they thought it was a glitch, a distortion in the video. But the more they stared, the more real the figure became. It wasn't just a trick of the camera. It was someone, something sitting among them, but on the screen there were 4, their stomachs twisted. The figure in the footage sat motionless, shoulders hunched, head slightly tilted. "Pause it," one of them whispered. Their voice shook. The screen froze. The timestamp read 2:18 a.m. Someone reached forward and moved the video frame by frame. The figure remained still for 3 frames. Then, on the 4th, they moved. A slight twitch, like their head was turning toward the camera. One of the explorers cursed under their breath. "Who the hell is that?" Nobody answered. A shift in the footage, the video continued. The figure did not fully turn around, but their shoulders shifted, as if they were listening. Then something happened. The lights in the footage flickered, first in the hallway, then in the room. A second later, the explorers in the video looked up, reacting to something. The real-life explorers mirrored their movements. They remembered this happening. The night before, the lights had flickered, but they had ignored it. Now, on screen, the figure at the table stood up. The explorers barely breathed as the figure took a slow, deliberate step toward the camera. The face in the shadows, the figure in the video remained blurry, their movements strange, like something trying to mimic a person but not quite getting it right. Their steps were too smooth, their head tilted too far. Then, the figure reached the edge of the table and stopped. They were close enough now that the low-resolution camera should have captured their face. But there was no face. Their minds struggled to process it. Their eyes searched for something, features, an outline, anything, but the static shifted, writhing like something alive. It wasn't just a blur. It was as if the face was deliberately concealed. Where the person's features should have been, there was only static. The explorers recoiled. One of them nearly knocked over their chair. The static shifted. It was watching them. The final moments, the timestamp on the footage read 2:19 a.m. The explorers in the video were staring at the camera, frozen in fear. And then the figure moved again. It reached forward with one distorted hand and touched the camera lens. The footage glitched violently. The screen filled with rapid static, breaking apart into incomprehensible images. A hospital hallway. A door slightly ajar. A room full of empty beds, sheets crumpled as if someone had just been lying there. A hand reaching for something unseen. A mouth opening, but no scream coming out. Then, darkness. The present, the real-life explorers sat motionless. Their screen had gone black, but something was still playing. Soft breathing. Not theirs. A click. They all turned sharply toward the hallway. The door at the end of the hall, the one that had been closed moments ago, was now slightly open. A single light flickered inside. One of them swallowed hard. The room had been locked, hadn't it? Something about this felt familiar. Like they had been here before, like they had done this before. But that was impossible. And then, from within the darkness, came a sound. A footstep. The explorers didn't dare move. Then, another footstep, closer this time. And from the laptop speakers, a voice whispered. A chill slid down their spines. The voice was low, layered, almost familiar, like a memory they couldn't quite reach. "Are you watching?" To be continued. The next file was titled File_004, the doctor's notes, and its last edit date was tonight. The Forgotten Files, Episode 4, File_004, the doctor's notes, the fourth file. The explorers hesitated before opening the next file. The last one had shaken them. The faceless figure, the time-stamped footage, the eerie familiarity. It all felt like a warning. Yet, despite their fear, they clicked on File_004.doc. It was a text document, dated tonight. The notes begin. The document was structured like clinical notes, written by Dr. Wallace. The same name from the whispering voice recording. Patient name, unidentified date of admission, June 14th, 1995. Dr. Wallace, R. A deep breath. They read on. The unidentified patient, June 14th, 1995, admitted a new patient found wandering the east wing of the hospital. No records, no identification. Patient was unresponsive except for one detail. They kept repeating a single phrase. They will watch. They will remember. June 15th, 1995, patient refuses to eat. Eyes remain unfocused. Spends hours staring at the mirror in the room, yet refuses to acknowledge their own reflection. Whispered something last night while I was leaving the ward. I see them now. June 16th, 1995, nurses reported patient sitting upright in bed at 2:13 a.m. Unmoving, unblinking. They were smiling, but there was something wrong. The smile was too wide. June 17th, 1995, patient missing from room. The doors were locked. The cameras show nothing, except for the mirror. They are inside it now. The reflection knows one of the explorers felt sick. Their hands trembled on the keyboard as they scrolled further. Another set of notes appeared. June 18, 1995, I reviewed the footage again. Something is in the mirror, something I cannot explain. A shape, a person, but the features remain distorted. I made the mistake of looking too long. I thought I saw myself. June 19, 1995, they spoke to me today. Not the patient, the reflection. Why are you reading this? The present, the explorers stared at the words, cold fear spreading through their bones. Their laptop screen reflected their own faces, their eyes wide with dread. Then they noticed something. One reflection was smiling. One of them blinked, instinctively leaning closer. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe the smile widened. They scrambled back, knocking over a chair. A strangled noise escaped one of them, a sound between a gasp and a scream. None of them had moved, and none of them had moved. The door opens a sound, soft at first, then a metallic click. Their breath caught. The door was locked. It had been locked. Now it was open. They turned their heads in unison, barely breathing. The door to the hallway, the one that had been shut, was now open. The darkness beyond felt deeper than before, pressing against the weak light of their screens. Then the laptop flickered. The document disappeared. Their laptop screens glitched, flickered, then went black. A long moment of silence. Then a new file appeared on the desktop. File _005, the mirror room. And below it, a single line of text. Look behind you. The Forgotten Files, Episode 5. File _005, the mirror room, the fifth file. The explorers hesitated, their breath uneven as the message on the screen burned into their minds. Look behind you. None of them wanted to turn. None of them wanted to confirm what they already feared. But something was there, a sensation, heavy and suffocating, creeping up their spines. The room held its breath with them, as if waiting. A deep, suffocating silence filled the room. The glow of the laptop screens barely illuminated their surroundings. But the moment stretched, unnatural and heavy, pressing down on them like an unseen weight. Then one of them, Daniel, exhaled sharply and whispered, "We have to look." He turned first. The others followed, their movements stiff, reluctant. The doorway was still open. The hall beyond remained dark, an abyss of shadows. But something felt wrong, a presence. A shuffling sound barely audible. A breath not their own. The hallway was watching. The recording begins, shaking off the terror crawling up their spines. They turned back to the laptop and clicked on file _005.mp4. The video opened in a dimly lit room. A single flickering light bulb dangled from the ceiling, casting shifting shadows against the cracked walls. A large, antique mirror dominated the space, its surface dulled and warped with age. The timestamp in the corner read June 19, 1995, 3:04 a.m. At first, nothing happened. The frame remained still, unmoving. Then something shifted in the reflection. Not in the room itself, just in the mirror. A faint, distorted outline of a person. The explorers leaned in, their hearts hammering. The figure stood unnaturally still, its features obscured by flickering interference. The video crackled, distorting, but the figure never moved. Until it did. Slowly, it tilted its head as if acknowledging them. Then it stepped closer. But the actual room in the video remained empty. Only the reflection moved. A silent witness, one of the explorers, Lisa, whispered, "It's seeing us." The screen glitched again, static washing over the image. The figure in the mirror took another slow step forward. And then it spoke. "Why are you watching?" The voice was fragmented, layered, as though multiple people were speaking at once. It was soft, yet it burrowed deep into their minds, curling into their thoughts like tendrils of smoke. The video cut to black. For a moment, there was nothing. Then a new timestamp appeared on the screen, June 20th, 2023, 3:04 a.m. The video resumed. The mirror was still there, but this time the reflection was different. It showed a room exactly like the one they were sitting in. And in the mirror, they were there, watching, frozen, unmoving. Except one of them was smiling. The reflection moves, panic surged through them. They scrambled away from the laptop, the chairs screeching against the floor. Their hands shook, their breath coming in ragged gasps. But the screen wasn't done with them yet. In the reflection, their doppelgangers remained still, except for the one with the smile. It twitched, curling wider, stretching beyond what should have been possible. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle. And then it raised a hand and waved. Lisa let out a choked cry, clutching the edge of the table. The air thickened, pressing against their lungs. The mirror trembled slightly as though breathing with them. The real group remained motionless, unwilling to acknowledge the impossible. Yet their reflections remained, watching, smiling. Then, one by one, they began to stand. Not the real explorers. The ones in the mirror. The video cut out. A new message, their laptop screens flickered violently, static crackling through the speakers. The darkness of the hallway pressed closer, suffocating. They could hear something now. A faint tapping sound, rhythmic, deliberate. It was coming from behind them. They didn't dare look. Then the laptop let out a sharp ping. A new file appeared on the desktop. The laptop screen flickered once, and for a split second, in its darkened reflection, they saw another figure standing behind them. File_006, the door that never closed. And beneath it, in small, trembling text, a message appeared. You let them see you. Now they are coming. The Forgotten Files, Episode 6, File_006, the door that never closed. The sixth file. A hush fell over the group as they stared at the message on the screen. You let them see you. Now they are coming. The words pulsed like a heartbeat. No one moved. No one spoke. Then the sound came again, tapping, gentle, rhythmic, just beyond the reach of their flashlights. Daniel swallowed hard. We need to get out of here. But the laptop screen flickered violently and a new file appeared. File_006, the door that never closed. The timestamp read June 21st, 2023, 3:15 a.m. Lisa's hands trembled as she clicked it open. The recording begins. A grainy black and white video feed flickered to life. The footage showed a door. Old, wooden, peeling paint. The kind of door that belonged in a place long forgotten. The timestamp in the corner shifted erratically, like the video itself was unstable. First, nothing happened. Then, a soft creak. The door slowly inched open. Lisa sucked in a sharp breath. The room beyond was shrouded in darkness. The camera remained fixed, capturing only the yawning black void past the doorway. Then movement. A shadow, subtle at first, shifting just at the edge of perception. Then another, and another, as if figures were pressing against the darkness, just beyond reach. And then, from within the blackness, a voice. Close the door. A terrible mistake. Lisa's hands hovered over the keyboard. Is this live footage? The others exchanged uneasy glances. Daniel shook his head. It can't be. The timestamp is from tomorrow. The video continued. The unseen figures in the dark shifted again, their movements more pronounced, more deliberate. Something brushed against the threshold. A hand. Pale, long fingers curling around the doorframe. The explorers recoiled from the screen. The hand twitched. Then, the voice again, quieter this time. Close the door, please. The camera flickered. The screen glitched. The image warped, distorting like static crawling over the lens. Then the perspective changed. It was no longer just the door in the frame. Now they were in the shot. The camera was showing their room, their setup, their laptop. Lisa let out a strangled gasp. Oh my God. The door opens further. The figures in the footage stepped forward in jerking, fragmented motions, as if skipping frames in a corrupted file. Their limbs twitched unnaturally, heads snapping too quickly from side to side. Their shadows, long and writhing, moved out of sync with their bodies. Their movements were jerky, unnatural. The sound of shuffling feet filled the speakers. Daniel reached for the laptop, but the screen froze. One of the figures in the footage raised a hand, the same pale fingers from before. It reached toward the door, gripping it tighter. And then, with slow, agonizing precision, it pulled the door open wider. A guttural, inhuman sigh echoed from the speakers. The explorers barely had time to react before the lights in their room flickered. A loud, sharp creak came from behind them. A sharp breath filled the room. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of something stale, like earth that had never seen daylight. A pressure settled over their chests, making it hard to breathe. Then a sound. A slow, deliberate creak. Their door had just opened. The wrong decision. Lisa turned first, her body stiff with fear. The others followed, dread coiling in their stomachs. The door to their room was ajar. The hallway beyond was a black void. The tapping sound had stopped. The world held its breath. A whisper slithered through the air. Not from the laptop, not from the recording, from the hallway. You should have closed the door. Then, from within the shadows, it stretched first. A long, spindly limb sliding into the light, fingers clawing against the floor. A shifting, half-formed silhouette followed, its head lolling to the side, as if listening. A breath, ragged and wrong, filled the room, and then it moved. The video on the screen cut to black. A single line of text appeared on the laptop. File_007. The hands in the dark, and beneath it, in the same trembling font as before, "Now you belong to them." The explorers hesitated before opening the next file. Each new discovery brought them closer to something they shouldn't have found. The last recording had left them shaken, but the growing sense of unease wasn't enough to stop them. File_007.wma. They pressed play. The reflection the recording began with soft static, then the voice of Dr. Wallace, calm yet noticeably strained. "Patient 217, tell me about the mirror." Silence. Then a faint, distorted chuckle. "It's not a mirror," the patient whispered. Dr. Wallace cleared his throat. "What do you mean?" A pause. The microphone crackled as if something was pressing against it. Then a barely audible phrase, "It's a door." The explorers stiffened. The voice wasn't alone anymore. A second voice, low, layered, and crawling beneath their skin, whispered over the first. A strange, rhythmic tapping sound began in the background. Slow, deliberate. Dr. Wallace inhaled sharply. "What's making that sound, patient 217? The tapping stopped. Then a sound like something wet moving across glass. "He's trying to step through." The manifestation. The explorers exchanged nervous glances but kept listening. A deep hissing crackled through the speakers like glass under extreme pressure. Then a sharp, agonized wail. The explorers yanked off their headphones. But the sound didn't stop. It was still playing. From inside the room, their gazes snapped toward the mirror on the far wall. At first, they saw nothing unusual, just their own pale, horrified reflections. Then the glass glitched. It flickered, shifting between dozens of reflections, none of which matched their movements. Their mouths stretched too wide, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. And then it stabilized. A new figure stood among them. At first, it was fragmented, appearing in pieces, an arm here, a torso there, as though it was being constructed in real time. The explorers watched, paralyzed, as it jerked into place, its limbs moving out of sync before snapping into unnatural stillness. Its face was missing. Then it took a step forward. The timestamp glitched. The explorers scrambled away from the mirror, but their laptop screen flashed violently. The timestamp on the recording began cycling through random dates: 1886, 1912, 1954, 1995, 2027. Each number flickered faster as if the system was breaking down. Then it stopped. The screen showed one simple word: today. Their blood ran cold. A single, distorted handprint formed on the inside of the mirror, pressing outward. The final whisper. The room fell deathly silent. One explorer turned slowly back to the mirror. His own reflection blinked, out of sync. It opened its mouth to speak, but the audio cut out. A sharp crack rang through the air. The mirror shattered, fragments scattering across the floor. Then, from the darkened hallway behind them, a whisper, calling their names. To be continued. The next file was titled File_008, The Visitor, and it had been created 3 minutes ago. The 8th file. They had sworn they wouldn't open another file. Not after the last one. Not after the whisper. But fear and curiosity were twisted things. And the new file was sitting there, waiting. A file that shouldn't exist. File_008, The Visitor. The timestamp? It had been created 3 minutes ago. One of them whispered, "Who made this?" No one answered. One of them reached forward. Fingers trembling, they clicked play. The recording, unlike the previous files, there was no static, no distorted interference. Instead, it started with breathing. Deep, slow, too close to the microphone. A chair creaked, as if someone inside the recording had just sat down. Then, a voice. "Do you know what happens when you listen too long?" The explorers froze. This wasn't a voice from the past. It was real time. The breathing continued. A faint scraping sound followed, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. Then a knock, loud, rhythmic. 3 knocks. Not from the recording, from their door. Something in the dark. No one moved. They had locked the building behind them. No one else was here. The knock came again. 3 times. Slow, measured. Then something shifted in the air. A breath not theirs. The recording crackled, and the voice returned. "They always knock first." One of them reached for the laptop, whispering, "Turn it off." But the file kept playing. The screen flickered, then changed. The camera feed had switched on, but it wasn't showing them. It was showing the hallway outside their door. Something was standing there. A figure, tall, thin, head tilted at an unnatural angle. Not moving, just watching. The footsteps. One explorer shot to his feet, knocking over his chair. He turned toward the door. Nothing. The hallway outside their makeshift setup stretched into darkness, the air thick and unmoving. Then the screen glitched. The figure on the feed twitched. The timestamp at the bottom of the video, it was changing, cycling through random past and future dates. June 17th, 1995, November 3rd, 2012, August 8th, 2029. Then it stopped. Today. Their blood ran cold. Then the figure moved. It stepped forward. And at the same time, the floor outside creaked. Something was walking toward them. The visitor enters, the flashlight beam cut through the dark. Empty hallway, but they could hear it. Soft, deliberate footsteps. One of them whispered, "We need to leave." But then the recording glitched and the figure inside the screen turned its head. Not in the video. Inside their room. The reflection moves. One explorer grabbed the laptop, slamming it shut. The screen went black. Silence. Then a quiet tapping sound. Not on the door. On the mirror. The flashlight flickered. The mirror was across the room, covered in dust, cracked from age. But now there was a handprint pressed against the inside of the glass, and their reflections were not moving. Final message. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then the laptop switched back on by itself. A new file had appeared. File _009. The final recording. Its timestamp read 5 minutes from now. Then a whisper. Turn around. The lights went out, and in the dark, something breathed. The 9th file. They hesitated before pressing play. They always hesitated now. The files had stopped feeling like discoveries and had begun feeling like traps. Each one reached further, pulling them deeper, making them question what was real. But curiosity, as always, was stronger than fear. File _009.wma. It wasn't just an audio file. This time, there was a video component, a grainy black and white feed from security camera 3B, East Wing, Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital. The timestamp read, October 15th, 2023, 11:57 p.m. Their stomachs dropped. That was tonight. They pressed play. The watching mirror. The footage showed a dimly lit room. It was almost empty, apart from an old, cracked mirror standing against the far wall. A single wooden chair sat in the center, facing it. Nothing moved. For a while, there was only silence, except for the faint hum of static. The explorers leaned closer, scanning every dark corner of the screen. Then the camera flickered. When the feed stabilized, there was someone sitting in the chair. Their breath caught. The figure was vague, almost transparent. It was impossible to make out details, but they could see its posture. Rigid, head tilted downward, hands clasped tightly together. One of them whispered, "Was that there before?" Another shake of the head. "No." Then, in the video, the mirror moved. Not the reflection, the actual mirror. It tilted slightly forward as if something behind it had shifted. The camera shook violently, distorting for a few seconds. When it returned to normal, the figure in the chair was staring at the camera. His face was blurred. Wrong. And then the mirror spoke. "You never left." It wasn't a voice in the traditional sense. It wasn't recorded dialogue or background noise. It was a whisper that came from inside the mirror itself. A whisper that they could hear in the room, not just through the speakers. "You have been here before." The explorers flinched. Their screen flickered violently again, distorting the image. The timestamp still read 11:57 p.m. The figure in the chair began to shake. His hands twitched. His shoulders tensed. The motion was wrong. Not natural, not human. The sound of nails dragging on would scraped through their headphones. The mirror whispered again, this time closer. "We remember you." One of the explorers yanked off their headphones, heart pounding. "Shut it off." Another hesitated, staring at the screen. "Wait," because the timestamp had changed. 11:58 p.m. It was catching up. Fractured time. They watched, unable to look away. The camera glitched again, and this time, something stepped into view. It moved behind the chair, a shadowy mass, its form flickering as if it were struggling to exist. The figure in the chair remained still, but its reflection in the mirror did not. The reflection was smiling, grinning, and then the explorer closest to the laptop gasped. "Look!" The timestamp had changed again. 11:59 p.m. They whipped their heads toward the clock on the wall. Their stomachs twisted. The real-time clock on their screen matched it exactly. The video was no longer recorded footage. It was live. They weren't watching a security feed from the past. They were inside it. The mirror in the video began to crack, long, deep fractures spreading across its surface. And then, from their own hallway just beyond their makeshift setup, they heard it. A drip, a slow, rhythmic dripping, like something leaking from inside the walls. The reflection moves first. They didn't want to look, but something in them forced them to turn. Across the room, near the only window, stood a mirror. It hadn't been there before. It was cracked just like the one in the video, and inside it, their reflections were watching them. Not moving, not breathing, just watching. And then the reflections moved first. They stood up, but the explorers didn't. One of the reflections tilted its head. The motion was delayed half a second too slow. Another lifted a hand and placed it against the glass. And from inside the mirror, their own voices whispered back, "It's your turn." Last file, they had come too far to turn back now. Fear had already gripped their souls, but curiosity, unstoppable, relentless, had driven them forward. Every file had revealed something worse than the last, something darker, something more real. Now only one remained. File _010.wmv. The explorers hesitated. Their fingers hovered over the keyboard, their breath shallow, their hands trembling. Every file had changed them. Every file had left something behind. What if this last one finished what had already begun? One of them finally pressed play. The screen flickered. Timestamp: November 1st, 2023, 3:33 a.m. A date in the future. A time that had not yet arrived. The screen remained black for a long time. Then a low hum. Not static, not feedback. Something deeper vibrating through the speakers, shaking their bones. The sound of something waiting. A click. A surveillance camera feed. It showed them. The unfolding the video displayed their current room. Same dim lighting, same laptops, same setup. The footage was grainy, but unmistakable. They were watching themselves from the future. One of them whispered, "No, this isn't real." But the screen told a different story. In the footage, they were sitting exactly as they were now. Same postures, same expressions of horror and confusion. But something was wrong. The figures on the screen looked distorted. The explorers leaned closer. Their future selves weren't moving right. The one in the middle twitched violently, their head jerking to the side, mouth opening and closing as if trying to speak but failing. Their hands trembled against the desk, fingers stretching unnaturally. The others remained eerily still, their faces frozen, their eyes too wide, too dark. Then one of them turned to the camera. Not on the live feed, on the recording. Their future self locked eyes with the screen with them, and they smiled. The message, the distorted version of one of the explorers, leaned toward the camera. The movement was unnatural, jerky, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. Then a voice, not from the recording, from inside the room. "Stop watching." The explorers froze. Their screens glitched. The recording continued playing on its own. On screen, the distorted version of themselves leaned forward again, lips moving in slow, deliberate motion. A whisper seeped through the speakers, low and breathy, as if it were inches away from their ears. It was layered, a voice tangled in static, neither fully human nor entirely inhuman, crawled through the air, wrapping around them, seeping into their skin. The sound carried a feeling cold, invasive, knowing. "You already know how this ends." The lights in their room flickered. One of them scrambled for the power button, trying to shut down the laptop, but the screen remained on. The file refused to close. The distorted figure on the screen stood up. And in the room behind them, a chair scraped against the floor. The crossing the explorers spun around, their eyes scanning the room. Nothing. They turned back to the screen. The footage now showed the room empty. Their future selves were gone. Then, a new timestamp flashed on the screen. November 1st, 2023, 3:34 a.m. A single second after the previous timestamp. But the room remained empty. Their hands shook as they watched the cursor on the screen move on its own, navigating the laptop's desktop. A folder opened. A new file appeared before their eyes. File _011.wmv. They didn't make that file. The cursor hovered over it. The file clicked open. The screen flickered, and the footage showed the door behind them slowly creaking open. The end or the beginning? A chilling wind swept through the room, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of something old, damp, decayed. The footage continued to play. Shadows pooled in the corner of the screen, something shifting, moving just beyond sight. The whisper returned, but this time it came from the walls. "You let us in." The explorers scrambled to shut their laptops, unplug the hard drives, erase everything. But the screens remained frozen, the video looping endlessly. The shadows on the footage moved closer, and then the power cut out. The room grew colder. A presence loomed just beyond their perception, pressing against the walls, suffocating the air. Their breath hitched as the monitors flickered, casting eerie, broken light across their faces. Then, as if the shadows themselves had been waiting, darkness swallowed the room, and a voice, low and familiar, whispered one final phrase, "Now we are you. To be continued?" No more files remained, or so they thought. A faint flicker ran across the screen, and deep in the silence, a new file began to form, letter by letter. File _012, WMV, or so they thought.